My name is Santiago Levy. I'm from the Inter-American Development Bank, and it's really a great privilege to be able to chair this session today. This session is truly historic, and I'm not exaggerating. It's a really truly historic session. As you all know, we're celebrating the 25th anniversary of LACEA, and it's said very quickly, but it's been a long time since this began. The session today is to celebrate this magnificent event, and fortunately, we've been able to put together a splendid session. What we'll do this morning is we're going to celebrate and give special prizes to the two founding members of LACEA, the first president, which is Professor Fishlow, and to Nora Lustig, which was the second president, and really is very much the work of Nora and Professor Fishlow that we're sitting in this room today. And for the last 25 years, we've been sitting in Bogota and in Mexico City and in Rio de Janeiro and in Santiago and in Bolivia, and next year we'll be sitting in Ecuador to discuss, to exchange ideas, and to learn from each other. So it's really a tribute to them that we're doing this morning. So LACEA is really a public good. And as I was thinking this morning, what I could say this morning is our region hasn't really been able to advance that much in trade integration, in energy integration, in financial integration, but we've certainly been advancing in ideas integration. And one thing that LACEA has been able to do is it's a forum in which Brazilians, Colombians, and Mexicans, and Chileans, and Argentinians, and Venezuelans, and everybody sits together, and we exchange ideas, we integrate ideas, we learn from each other. As was mentioned last night during a dinner that we had hosted by the government of Argentina very nicely, many ministers, vice ministers, many policymakers have emanated from LACEA, and we truly believe that this helps to better public policies and to improve the lives of people in the Caribbean and Latin America. So with that, the idea is first to have Guillermo Calvo give some words on Fishlow, and then we'll give Professor Fishlow an opportunity to say some words as well. Then Sebastian Edwards will say some words for Nora Lustig, and then Nora will have also some words. And then there are a series of prizes and awards that I'll mention as the session goes along. I'll end here by just saying that Fishlow was the first president of LACEA, followed by Nora, then followed by Guillermo, and followed by Sebastian. So it's really a pleasure to have in the podium today the first four presidents. Many other presidents, I can see right here, Ricardo Hausmann, Eduardo Engel was sitting out there somewhere, Roberto Rigobon was over here, Mariano Estomasi, who's also president of LACEA, sitting here. I'm not sure whether I'm missing somebody, but I think it's rare that so many ex-presidents of the organization are sitting together, and we thank them all for being here this morning. So with that, Guillermo.
Well, thank you very much, Santiago. It's a privilege, really, to participate of these meetings. It's unbelievable, 25 years have passed. What was a dream has become a reality, and a very active and growing reality. Now, we are here partly to celebrate and honor two people who really have played a key role in the creation of LACEA. And it is my duty, actually my pleasure, to say a few words about what was the first president of LACEA, Professor Albert Fishlow. You know, LACEA is a Latin American and Caribbean association, so Latin America is very high up in our priorities, has always been. So here we have Al Fishlow, who I might say is a Latin Americanist. That's a mouthful, but I think it describes him very well. A very special person. Somebody who fell in love with Latin America, as far as I can tell, reading his Evita and papers and books in about 1965. He fell in love with Brazil, particularly, and from Brazil probably with the rest of the region, and has continued working along those lines Actually, his latest book, published by Brookings, is Starting Over Brazil since 1985. So his mind is very much with us and has been with us and this association for this many 25 years. And I'd like just to quote something I read recently, just to give you a sense of the impact that art has had in the region. And I agree fully with what I read, which is not available to the public because it's one of those things that people write sometimes for other, to sponsor something that we don't publicize. But I like very much this phrase from a very distinguished Brazilian economist who says, the scope, and I'm quoting, the scope of his intellectual work is as important for an understanding of Latin American economies as the classical texts of Raúl Prebisch, Albert Hirschman, and Carlos Díaz Alejandro. That's very, very high praise, and it reflects also the love that the Brazilians have for this gentleman. Of course, that's only half of the story. The other half was before he fell for Latin America. He already had under his belt a very important work on US railroads and also other notable economic contributions. So he left that behind. That's the way I feel it worked, and really put his heart into Latin America. And another thing that very few people know, but I had the privilege of, I know him for many, many years, but also we became colleagues at Columbia University in 2007. By the way, he left very soon after. I don't know if there is any correlation there. You ask him. But I would characterize Al as a great, as we say up north, a great citizen, or more in the spirit of Latin America jargon, a great guy, and which is always ready to give you an advice, criticism if necessary, but always in a very modest and wise way. So that falls very well with our culture. We don't like to be very confrontational, I hope. So he, as I said, played an important role for LACEA. He was not only the first president, but he was president for 4 years, the longest tenure of all the succeeding presidents. But besides that, he's always been in touch, and you knew over these years that you could contact him, and he will be ready to give a hand. So I'm really very happy to convey what the committee has decided, a little plaque recognizing this. But personally, I'd like to thank for, number one, being such a friendly person, so ready to help the region, and from a personal point of view, to be such a good friend. So please join me in celebrating this by a big hand. Let me just read what the plaque says, and then I'll give it to Al. The plaque says, for Professor Albert Fishlow, is awarded the title of President Emeritus in recognition of his strong leadership and unwavering support, Buenos Aires, Argentina, November 2017.
Well, thank you very much. I am honored in a very distinctive fashion to be here at the meeting of LACEA. It is a wonderful group. I was looking through the booklet describing all of the sessions and reading all of the papers that had not been invited, but which had been chosen competitively. And it made me feel that whatever I had done to help get started with LACEA has come to a wonderful future. I also briefly want to assure everyone that I gave up the presidency willingly rather than by necessity of a coup, and therefore you shouldn't take the 4 years as being indicative of my concern about power. Thank you.
Thank you all. As I mentioned before, Sebastián was our fourth president, and now we're going to ask him, please, to say some words for Nora.
Thank you very much. This is Nora. The photo is up there. I don't know if you know that. So that photo shows a very young Nora. What is impressive is that she looks now exactly how she looked then. So probably by looking at me, you can tell that this was a long time ago. But looking at her, you could think it was last year because she looks exactly the same. So I'll tell a little bit of the story and about that photo that I found and that I sent to Eduardo Lora, the current president, so that he could show it to everyone here. So I'm going to repeat some of the things that I said last night at this dinner. Nora is the mother and the father of LACEA, and this doesn't say anything about Al. Al is the godfather, okay? So in a sort of deep way, also in the sense of the movie, The Godfather. So Al is the godfather of LACEA. But the mother and the father of LACEA is Nora. And I'm one of the few people that know the true story about LACEA. So in 1990, this photo is from 1990, and it is in Santiago, and I'll say a little bit more about it. Around 1990, 89, 90, probably 1990, Nora called me and told me about her idea of doing LACEA. At the time, I was running a very small conference, yearly conference, a boutique really, that was organized jointly by the National Bureau of Economic Research and by PUCI, the Catholic University in Rio. And the co-directors were Edmar Bacha, who is in the picture at the extreme right, that's Edmar, and myself. And we had 12 papers every year, 6 from North American authors and 6 from Latin American authors. And then we published some of the papers in the Journal of Development Economics, which was edited by Al Fishlow. So the cast of characters was very similar. And Nora said, we have to, and this is one of the conferences, and Nora was presenting a paper, and there you see, well, starting from the left, myself, Nora, Jeff Caroliner, who was the executive director of the NBR, Felipe Larraín, who was the Minister of Finance in Chile, and he's preparing himself for another position in the government if Sebastián Piñera wins, and Edmar Bacha. And Nora told me we need to have an association that is very democratic and that we have a lot of people come in and young people and so on. And I was dead against it. And I told her, no, I am not going to be part of this. And I said, we already have the small meeting. We have the Econometric Society. And people can apply to the other meetings. And she insisted. And she talked about LACEA having been taken over by, which is the Latin American Studies Association, taken over by radical economists. There was no room for mainstream analysis. And I was wrong and she was right. That's been the story of our relationship. She's always right, I'm always wrong. And, but with time, she started convincing other people. And during the early 90s, we would meet in Washington in a restaurant called the Tabard Inn. Guillermo Calvo, Ricardo Hausman, Al Fishlow would come down, would be there occasionally, Nora, myself, and she convinced all of us to launch LACEA. And I was convinced, and I was at the time at the World Bank, and we provided some funding. I never, ever dreamed that it would become what it did. And all of that is thanks to Nora. But Nora is not only the great organizer and the mother, she's also a very prominent, highly respected original scholar. And her work through the years on a number of topics has been very important. And also she is the greatest representative of what it means to be a Latin American. Nora, some of you, or many of you don't know, was born here in Argentina. And she and her family, and I'm telling this story out of what I remember conversations between Nora and myself through the years, so I may get something wrong, but I think that by and large is correct. She emigrated with her family when she was a teenager to the United States, and they lived in Berkeley. And she was an undergraduate at Berkeley, where she was Al Fishlow's research assistant. Okay, so this is something that goes a long, long way back, working on income distribution, which was what Al was working at the time, with a focus on Brazil. And the intellectual interest that Nora has had for income distribution, poverty, social programs, and which a field where she has become an international force, an authority, comes from those days. And then she decided to stay on at Berkeley and get her PhD there, where I think that it was at Berkeley where she met Antonio. And then they moved to Mexico. So she has 3 Latin American hats. Buenos Aires, she was born in Argentina. She moved to California, which is a Latin American jurisdiction, if you really think seriously about it. And then she moved to Mexico, where she lived for a number of years. Then she went to Washington, where she was a senior fellow at Brookings and a very, very, very influential member of the scholarly family at Brookings. And she published a remarkably influential book on Mexico at Brookings and other works. And then she went back to Mexico, where she was president of Universidad de las Américas in Puebla. And she was the first woman president of the Universidad de las Américas, and probably of a major university in Mexico. And that, of course, was very, very important. And when she was at the Universidad de las Américas, she hosted a LACEA meeting that was incredible and memorable. And we had a great time, and we drank a lot of tequila at that meeting. And then she came back to the US and joined the faculty at Tulane. And her recent work on income distribution in Latin America and the network that she has built and her interest and ability to work with young co-authors and to give them guidance is really amazing. And it should be an example for others to follow. So it is a great privilege for me to give this plaque, this recognition to Nora, the mother and the father of LACEA, a great scholar, a woman of distinction, a friend of mine for many, many years. As she told me the other day, although we haven't seen each other for a long time, el cariño está aquí. Nora, congratulations.
So I better be short because otherwise Eduardo will not have a presidential address. So I think that the only thing I wanted to say is that 2 pieces of advice. Never take no for an answer. If I had taken no for an answer, we wouldn't exist. And dream on. Thank you very much.
I'll switch to Spanish for 3 seconds. Honor a quien honor merece. So that was very nice. Congratulations to both. So the next item on the agenda, before we can turn to Eduardo's presidential address, is a few issues. But one that is very nice is, as you know, LACEA decided a few years ago to establish the Juan Luis Londoño Prize. And for those of us who had the privilege to know Juan Luis Londoño, he was a great guy. He was a fantastic guy from Colombia, always interested, always discussing. You know, if you ever had the chance with him, he was just pure energy. And he had, sadly, a tragic accident. And I think LACEA quite rightly decided to establish a prize in his honor. And this year's prize, there were 6 participants. Let me tell the names. I will not read the papers. It was Felipe González, Tajeda Gracner, Sandra Rosso, Santiago Tobón, Diego Ufal, and Raimundo Undurraga. And there's a committee that assesses all the papers and that tries to make the best decision in terms of what is the best paper. And I'm very, very pleased to announce that the decision, the winner is, as they would say in Hollywood, Tajeda Gracner. So. Tajeda wrote a very nice paper on, the title is Bittersweet, How Prices of Sugar-Rich Foods Contribute to Diet-Related Disease Epidemic in Mexico. And congratulations, Graciela. Okay, so with that, let me just get my notes. I lost one.
I think you have to.
Oh, here it is. So we have a few announcements to make about LACEA, and then we'll turn to Eduardo's address. The next announcement I have to make is the working paper series. Eduardo has been leading a working group with the executive committee, and this is really a lot of merit by Eduardo and the executive committee, of trying to put on a new idea to enhance the benefits that LACEA gives to the members and enhance the channels by which the research of everybody can be known and well. And Irene was actually decided to be the editor-in-chief of a new LACEA working paper series, and would like to ask Irene if you very quickly tell us exactly what it means and how it's going to work, and as of when it's going to start working. Thank you, Irene.
Yes, so like Santiago is saying, we would like to announce that LACEA is launching a working paper series. We have been thinking about this for the last few years with the idea of providing more services to LACEA members and to the Latin American economic, academic community, and thinking that people based in Latin America don't typically have direct access to publishing in the MBR or the CPR working papers. We would like to provide an outlet for all the papers written by people related to LACEA. So the idea is that this working paper series is going to work pretty much like the MBR, the CPR. People will send papers that have not yet been published, and we are going to publish them without a peer review process and without with minimum filters. And this is going to be functional starting in January. And well, I'm going to be the editor. I'm not really sure what that means yet. I hope it doesn't mean too much. But I'm going to be the editor the next 2 years, so we are going to take our first steps. And LACEA's executive committee, one of these steps is that LACEA's executive committee has nominated a list of about 100 people to become LACEA research associates. So these research associates are senior researchers related to LACEA, to Latin America, who have a publication record in the last few years, and that we hope that they will contribute to the list of working papers. So we would like to congratulate our starting list of LACEA associates. The executive committee will continue to work on nominating more people. And well, we want to invite you to publish in the working paper series as soon as possible.
Listo, René. And thank you very much for taking this task. Okay, a couple of announcements about our journal Economía. First, as you know, Carlos B. was named Chief Economist of Latin America at the World Bank. And understandably, Carlos has to step down from being editor of Economía. I don't know whether Carlos is here sitting somewhere. If not any case, we really do want to thank him for his job and for all the work that it implies to be the editor of Economía. Having thanked Carlos, we have excellent news because two excellent people have decided to be co-editors of the journal Economía as of January of next year. It's going to be Sergio Ursúa and Marcela Slava. I don't know whether I saw Sergio yesterday. Oh, he's over there. Gracias, Sergio. And I haven't seen Marcela. I don't know if she's here. She didn't come this time. Okay. But in any event, we have two splendid editors as for Economía as of next year, for the next couple of years. So, muchas gracias, Sergio. Gracias, Marcela. And we'll continue with the work of the journal then. And then the next announcement I'd like to make is that elections are on as of now. Since Fishlow was president, this has been a very democratic society. No coup d'etats yet. No clean elections. No vote recalls. So they close on Sunday, November 12th, and there are elections for vice president and for new nominations for the executive committee. So please, it's by electronic methods. Please do vote. One last announcement, and then we'll turn over to Eduardo. The next announcement is also a very pleasant one, which is that LACEA has been managing to be moving from different countries, and next year we're going to have a LACEA for the first time in Ecuador. It's going to be held in Guayaquil. It's going to be hosted by ESPOL, La Escuela Superior Politécnica del Litoral. I don't know whether Leonardo Sanchez is at the room this morning. Where is he? Leonardo, stand up. Muchas gracias, Leonardo. He's decided to take the task of having the first time LACEA in Ecuador next year. So for next year, bring your guayaberas. It's going to be a little bit hot over there in Guayaquil, but it's going to be splendid to be in Ecuador for the first time. Okay, so that's it for the announcements. This is really an excellent morning for me because all I get to do is to introduce or speak about people that I like a lot. But in the case of Eduardo Lora, it's like really a huge pleasure. I've known Eduardo for a very long time. He's, as Guillermo was saying, Oval, he's a Latin Americanist. He's worked with Guillermo, he's worked with Ricardo. We worked together at the IDB. We were colleagues for quite a few years. We've been friends from before that. Many of us have read Eduardo's papers, Eduardo's books, Eduardo's writings. He was central to the construction of the research department at the IDB, with the leadership first of Ricardo and then with the leadership of Guillermo. Then Eduardo occupied the leadership at the research department. That is, as I think of it, a public asset, un bien público de América Latina, and he's done a wonderful job with that. In addition, he has been our president for the last 2 years, we've come so far here, and he's mostly responsible for having organized this 25 years. Beyond all those accomplishments, anybody who knows Eduardo, he knows he's a splendid person. He only means well. He really is like best of friends, completely committed to Latin America. And now it's my pleasure to give him the word for him to give us his presidential address, which is entitled, has a funny title, something about informal labor markets. Where do I put it? You'll hear it from Eduardo in a minute. Please help me in welcoming Eduardo.
So thank you very much, Santiago, for those kind words, and thanks you all for being here. It's a great pleasure to be, I think this was a great coincidence that I became president without knowing that this was going to be the 25th anniversary of LACEA, and then Nora, who is the mother of all of us, as we know, told me that I had this responsibility on my shoulders. Had I known that, probably I hadn't accepted this position. I'm going to talk, if the slides appear sometime, about labor formality, informality in Latin America. And I have titled my presentation, that's the funny title that Santiago was looking for. I have titled my presentation, Labor Informality with New Eyes. And the reason why I chose this title is Marcel Proust. Because Marcel Proust has this beautiful sentence that says, the true voyage of discovery consists not in looking for new landscapes, but in having new eyes. And that's my challenge today, and it's my invitation to you to look at the problem of formality, informality, which is familiar to many of us, with new eyes. I started thinking about this topic and about the need for new eyes when I saw this picture for the first time. I was sitting beside Ricardo at Harvard when we were working for the Atlas of Economic Complexity, and I remember when I saw this graph and I say, this is incredible. It is incredible because I never realized that there was such a strong relationship between the size of cities and the formal employment rates. Larger cities have significantly larger formal employment rates, and here we are defining formal employment rates as the share of the working age population who work for firms. And we are adjusting for the effective number of weeks. That's why the coefficients are very low. It's, as you say, on average in Colombia, roughly just a quarter of the working age population works in firms in effective time, okay? If you count everybody, it would be like 50%, okay? But then once you discount for the time that they effectively work in a year, then it's about 25%. So this is a very strong relationship. It's, this comes from Social Security data that was put together for the projects on the Atlas of Economic Complexity that Ricardo was leading, and that I had the pleasure to help coordinate, and I specifically worked in the one for Colombia. It's interesting because although this graph was completely new to me, I should have seen this graph before. This is the official definition of formality and informality, which is just the share of those that are occupied that are either in the formal or the informal sector. And the definition that is used in Colombia, the official definition, is those who work in firms smaller than 10 employees. And you also see the positive relation. So how could I have missed, and probably, I don't know, many of you have missed this, and especially, how come all that research in this topic has never addressed this particular issue? Unless I have missed some papers, I don't know, but to the best of my knowledge, there is nothing on this. And this is not something specific of Colombia. I just stumbled on it when I was working on Colombia. But if you go to the data, similar data in Mexico, you see also a very strong relationship between city size and formal employment rates. If you check the data for Brazil, it's the same. Even in the US, it's statistically significant. Larger MSAs, what they call it, as they call them, metropolitan statistical areas, have larger, higher formal employment rates. And it's a great problem that we are not paying attention to this because there is a lot of action behind this data. This graph compares the variances of the formal employment rates across cities within countries, on the right, and the variance of the formal employment rates across countries for all the developing countries. And as you see, in any country for which we have information, the variance across cities is larger than the variance across a country. So we are facing a big, important, stylized fact that hasn't been explained. And that's the purpose of this talk and the purpose of the work that I have done, luckily with the help of an amazing group of young researchers, Juan Camilo Chaparro, who is somewhere here, or isn't here, over there, Nivo Clery, and Andres Gomez. Obviously, this is, when I say joint, it's totally joint work. It's not that I have led them in any way. We have worked together. So what I want to do in this presentation is basically highlight what is new in this approach that we have developed, present the theoretical model and the predictions of that model, and test the predictions of that model with the statistical, with empirical data for Colombia, and in that specific, in those specific tests, I will be using data for Colombia only. And then I will discuss an important extension, which is the role of distance in all the explanations that I'm going to give, and then I will end up with a few policy implications. So what is new in our approach? What is new in our approach is the way we combine several trends of the literature, or several literatures, I would say. First, our focus on cities, which I have already motivated, I guess, and which is obvious when you are working with labor markets, because cities are the actual places where labor markets operate. After all, cities exist because they give firms access to workers and workers access to different sources of employment. The second thing that we take advantage of is the literature on skill diversity and the importance of skill diversity. Actually, that literature, if you trace the roots of that literature, it starts with Marshall, which basically said that agglomeration economies result in part, Marshall mentioned many other sources of agglomeration economies, but result in part from the interaction between individuals with different skills. So we are following that tack, I would say. The third thing that is new is our emphasis on the diversity, on the role of tacit knowledge. We have always accepted that firms exist because there is some inability to do complete contracts. And since codes, we know that this is a very strong argument for the existence of firms. But I want to, or we give this approach an additional twist. We say firms exist because the inability of markets to contract over tacit knowledge. So it's an ability to contract, but we make it a little bit more specific in a way. Say firms exist because you cannot have contracts over tacit knowledge. After all, it's tacit knowledge. And the result of it, the product of tacit knowledge, is difficult to contract on. So that's the reason for the existence of firms in our approach. And this is very important because the other side of the coin is the existence of informal labor. You have informal labor when you do not have firms producing certain things. And how come that be? Well, because in some cases, tacit knowledge is extremely simple, or there are no issues about the allocation of rights of the things that tacit knowledge produces. So in those cases is when you have informal labor. In the other cases, you have formal labor. That's basically what we are saying. Obviously, this is a strong simplification. We are not denying that many things affect the borderline between formality and informality. Of course, we are not saying that. And we are very aware, obviously, of the works of people sitting here, like Santiago himself and Adriana Kugler, who must be somewhere around, who has done a lot of work on that too. So we're not denying that. What we're saying is, yeah, that may move the border, but the reason that there is a border is basically what we are trying to argue. And finally, and very importantly, we take advantage of the recent literature on technology that sees technology as an evolutionary process. And basically what we take from this is that firms evolve. Firms are not static organisms or animals. They are tinkering with the skills all the time, in order to survive. And in order to survive, they tinker with the things that they do and the way they do things, and every now and then they stumble onto something new. Maybe a new product, maybe a new way of doing things, a new combination of skills, and that's what makes new products appear, new industries appear, and new forms of production appear. So what we are saying here is basically that the set of feasible technologies or products is not known in advance to firms. They know what they are doing, obviously, but they don't know what they could do. They discover it in this tinkering with the skills. So with that basis, we developed a theoretical model to basically understand the process of formal employment creation by firms that operate, and this is important, in different industries in a city. Okay, so cities produce different things, and that's what we want to really focus on. And to build the model, we make a series of simplifying assumptions as is needed, obviously. First, we assume that each city is endowed with a supply of diverse skills. We do not consider migration. Migration obviously occurs in practice, but we ignore it, and that's not a big stretch in the case of at least Colombia and other Latin American countries, neither internal migration or international migration. We assume that each industry uses a unique mix of skills. It's not different amounts of the same skills. I'm not saying that. It's not different amounts of the same skills. No, it's different mix of skills, okay? And I will show that in the production function that we use. And we assume that firms in each industry face competition in the national market. What that means is that all goods are nationally tradable, and that firms have to minimize costs in order to survive, as I have already mentioned. We assume that there is a wage floor. We don't discuss the reason for this wage floor. This is just an analytical resource. We make the wage floor, which may be the minimum wage or be a reservation wage or whatever, the numerator of our model. And we assume that firms fully hire some skills but not others. Okay, so some skills are overabundant, let's put it that way, for the needs of firms. And those skills that are overabundant may be used by the informal sector or may be left idle or whatever, or unemployed, or whatever you want. Okay? So there are skills that are more than what the firms need. But firms face scarcity in some other skills. So according with that, we define a sort of degree of scarcity or degree of sophistication of the skills that the different firms use. So I'm not going to describe the whole model. That would take me all the time that I have. But I just want to highlight like the main pieces, the main the main cogs that make the machinery move. And these are basically there are basically three of those pieces. The first one is the supply of skills. What we say is that each worker has just one skill, so that if you sum over all the skills of everybody, then you have the total number of the total size of the working age population, okay? And every year there is some addition to those in each city, some addition to those number of workers. And we assume, based on the works by Luis Bettencourt, that the diversity of skills that a city has this this semi-log relation with the size of the city. Okay, something that has been very studied in the scale literature on many aspects, not just related to skills, but related to many things. So this has a very solid, both theoretical and empirical basis. Okay. We use a production function that in some respect is quite standard. It's just a constant elasticity of production function, but with two things that are, two particularities, I would say. One is that the only inputs that are used are skills. Okay, those are the only things that enter the production function. And as I have already mentioned, that each industry uses a different mix of skills. So this production function is the same for I mean, in general, for all the industries, but for some industries may have just 2 elements, for other industries may have 5 elements, and so on. And the elements pertaining to each of those may be different. And we assume a role such that there is complementarity across skills. Okay, skills are complementary, and that's essential for the results. And finally, the other important piece of the theoretical model is that, as I have said, firms evolve. In what sense do firms evolve? Well, we model this in very simple ways. Basically, there are two rules of evolution of firms. There are new firms that appear out of nowhere, and what we say is that they tend to appear more frequently in those industries that use skills that are more abundant, which I think is just common sense. So, I mean, it's much easier to create a new industry when all the skills are available and are around you than to create industries when the skills are very difficult to find and even very difficult to identify to know what you need. So that's the first evolutionary rule that we use. And the second evolutionary rule is related to this, but refers not to new firms, but to existing firms. What we say is that existing firms also evolve, and they evolve moving to industries that technologically are similar to them, and then the probability is that existing firms move to other industries that use the same type of skills and some other skills that are available in the city. Okay, so the probability that they move to another industry depends on their own skill mix and on the relative abundance of the additional skills that would be needed to move to another industry. Okay, so that's the two evolutionary rules that we have, and that's essential for the mechanics of the model and of how the model works in practice. So the model makes several important predictions, and we want to test them. The first prediction is that the ones that we wanted, obviously, to demonstrate, so there is no mystery here. With the model predicts that formal employment rates are higher in larger cities. Yeah, that's what we wanted to show. But obviously, that's not the real test of the model. The real test of the model is if other predictions are supported by the data, so that we can have certain confidence that the mechanisms that we are proposing are the right mechanisms. And that's the real test of a model of this nature. So we make 5 predictions in addition to the basic one. And the 5 predictions are these. First, that entry of firms is lower in high complexity sectors. And I put complexity in quotation marks because we mean something very specific about that. What we mean by complexity is this term that you have there, which basically says that complexity is a combination of the number of skills that are used in each industry, and this theta coefficient, which is just the degree of specialization of the degree of abundance, or scarcity, let's put it the other way, of the skills, and then obviously affected by the elasticity of substitution. So that's how we define complexity. So to put that concept in your mind, basically think of complexity as the number and degree of specializations that are used in an industry, okay? Now, that's the first prediction. The second prediction is that wages are higher in high complexity industries, which is intuitive, makes sense, because high complexity industries use skills that are scarce, and therefore they should have higher wages. So we want to test that. The third prediction of the model is that larger cities are more complex, which is also very intuitive. Larger cities have more diverse skills, that's what we are assuming, and therefore by having more diverse skills, they should be able to develop more industries in complex sectors. So it follows logically from the structure and the assumptions of the model, but we want to test if this is the case or not. The fourth, which is a dynamic prediction, different to the other ones, which are just static predictions. This is a dynamic prediction which says that there is no convergence in formal employment rates. And this is an important prediction because it's saying cities don't tend to become equal in terms of the formality or informality rates. That's what the model said. The model does not necessarily say that they become unequal, although I will show you the data about that in a minute. And the fifth prediction, and which in a way is the most important and the most ambitious one, is that it's a prediction on time. So it's a prediction on a prediction. So is that the ability that you have to move to more complex industries today influences how much additional employment you are going to create in the future. Okay? This is a very strong result and very important because it's saying that this model has predictive power in time. I mean, it can tell you something about the future of cities. Okay, so those are the five predictions. We want to test if the data really support these predictions, because as I say, that's what really matters for knowing if we have the right model or a model that approaches reality in a sensible way. The problem that we have is that we do not observe skills. I have defined skills as tacit knowledge, and therefore, by definition, I mean, this is very difficult to observe. Here in skills, we are not talking about degrees of education, or we are not talking about, I don't know, a few non-cognitive skills or numeracy or things. No, no, no. We're talking about knowledge, a productive knowledge of all types. So how do we deal with that? Well, the way to deal with that has been solved by Ricardo Hausmann and Cesar Hidalgo already. So that's we are building this model on the shoulders of giants, as they say. So that's easy for us, because that's exactly what they try to do. The way they define complexity in their atlases of economic complexity, both the international atlas, how is it called? The Atlas of International, the International Atlas of Complexity. Economic complexity, right, that's it. And then we have several versions of this, including the one for Colombia and for Mexico, Peru, and so on. The way they define complexity is this. Complexity is a measure of the amount of productive capabilities that an industry requires to operate. Industries are complex when they require sophisticated level of productive knowledge, with many individuals with distinct specialized knowledge interacting in a large organization. So that's exactly what our model is talking about. So we're going to borrow this from Hausmann and Hidalgo and use their methods of calculation of this, which basically consist on calculating the average diversity of locations, in other words, how many industries you see in a location, and the average ubiquity of the industries, in other words, how many cities have a specific industry. This may sound like a twist, a tongue twister. So in order to explain that, I better show the basic data that is used for this. The basic data is pretty simple, as a matter of fact. The data that is used for this is basically a matrix of ones and zeros, where one is the presence of an industry in a city, which is defined on the basis of the relative comparative advantage of the industry in the city. That means the relative size of the industry in the city. And then what this matrix shows is on the rows, in the rows, what you have is the different cities ordered by diversity. Not surprisingly, the most diverse city in Colombia is Bogotá, followed by Cali, Medellin, and so on and so forth. And on the columns, you have the different industries, starting with the most common industries, the most ubiquitous industries, such as, for instance, grocery stores or gas stations, or things that appear everywhere. While on the right, you have industries that are uncommon, that only occur in a few places, and you have this very clear triangular shape in this matrix, which means that the things that occur in all places occur both in the places that are very diverse and also in the places that have very low diversity, the ones on the left. But those things that are on the right, many of them are only produced by cities that have many industries. Okay, and that's what gives origin to this triangular pattern. And so we make the calculations using the algorithms developed by them, and this is what we have in terms of the most and least complex industries in Colombia. So the most complex industries are IT and related activities, automotive vehicles, and so forth. The least complex are waste disposal, hotels, retail activities, etc. And we also compute on the basis of the methods that they have developed the complexity of the cities, the industry complexity of the cities, which is similar in the calculations to the export complexity in the International Atlas. And the most complex city in Colombia, not surprisingly, is Bogotá, followed by Medellin, Cali, but followed by other cities that are much smaller that probably you have never heard of, Rio Negro, Palmira, Santander de Quilichao, cities that happen to have skills that are pretty sophisticated in spite of being relatively small, okay? So this is the data that we get. And then, okay, now we are ready to test the predictions. All right, first prediction. Entry of firms is lower in high complexity industries. That's clear in the data. There's no doubt whatsoever about that. I have collapsed here the calculations by industry, by the complexity decile of the industries, okay? But I have here all the calculations are based on all the industries, on all the cities, and all the years. And what you see is this very clear pattern, whereas the model predicts where low complexity industries have higher entry rates, they also have higher exit rates. The model doesn't say that. Maybe we could derive it, but so far we haven't done it. But the model doesn't say that, but the data does say that. It's very clear that low complexity industries also have high exit rates, and therefore the churning rates have also the same pattern. So that's about the first prediction. The second prediction is that wages are higher in more complex industries, which is very intuitive, I think, and it's also very clear, very clearly supported by the data, using the same method of aggregation. The third prediction is that larger cities are more complex, which also holds very clearly. The top ones on the right are obviously Bogotá, Medellin, Cali, but look at the other ones, some ones that are pretty complex, as I mentioned, which are relatively small, these cities that are not so well known. So that's the third prediction. The fourth prediction is that there is no convergence in formal employment rates. Actually, what the data shows is divergence big time, which is, for me, was a surprise. I wasn't expecting anything like this. But it's very clear in the data. I'm showing here just a sub-period, but it's also valid for the other period for which we have information. Our data goes from 2008 to 2015, and it's very clear. And you see that this very clear divergent pattern by which cities that start with a high formal occupation rate have larger increases in the future in formal occupation rates. It's not that the low complexity, that the low formality ones decline. No, they do not decline. Look at the data. Most of the points are above zero, at least for this period. But those that already have formal activities, they do better as time goes by. The fifth prediction, it's a little bit more complicated, and I'm going to devote some time to it because we have to develop a new variable that is not observed directly, which is what we call complexity potential. Complexity potential is as I already mentioned, complexity potential is the ability that a city has to move to industries that are more complex than those already has. Okay? We do not observe that, and in the model, this is represented in this, in the model, this is represented in that expression over there, which, as you see, is a combination of the complexity of the industries that are not present in the city, that's the C prime term over there, multiplied by the transition probabilities, from the industries that the city do have to the industries that the city doesn't have. Okay? And we do not observe that, but we use a proxy for that, and the proxy that we use is that those probabilities depend or reflect the technological similarity or the similarity of the skills that that pair of industries uses. So think of industry J and industry J prime as just two industries. Obviously, this is a matrix, but let's reduce it to just one industry, one existing industry and one non-existing industry. Then what this would say is that the probability of transitioning of a firm transitioning from industry J to industry J prime depends on how similar are the skills of both industries and the availability of the skills, where we already have that information, and what we obtain from an additional calculation in the data is this similarity of technologies or of skill composition between industries, which is computed on the basis of the flows of workers between industries. So if two industries have flows in both directions that are very intense relative to their size, flows of workers that are very intense relative to their size, we deduce from there that they use similar skills, because the people that are moving are the same. I mean, they bring their skills from one industry to the other. With that, then we are able to test our fifth prediction, which I say is the most ambitious and the most and the strongest one, I would say, which is that the change in formal employment in the future is faster in cities with higher initial complexity potential. And this graph shows the initial complexity potential in 2011 and the change 4 years hence. And you see this very clear positive relationship. So cities that have the skills to move to other industries that they do not yet have higher increases in formal employment. And we have tested these a bunch of regressions. These are very simple regressions. They're just OLS. And the coefficient of interest is the first row. As you see, the coefficient is always significant. It's significant to the inclusion of many alternative explanations of formal employment growth, such as, for instance, demand shocks, government expenditure shocks, sectoral shocks, whatever. And you see that pattern that is very clear, very consistent, and holds even when you split the data, by low and high complexity industries, and also when you split the data by subperiods. And you can even do it by yearly subperiods, and you always get basically the same result. So we have a very strong econometric result to support this prediction. And we have tested if that explanation fares well compared with alternative explanations. And for that, we have used the standard global competitiveness indicators, which in the case of Colombia have been produced at the department level using exactly the same methodology of the global competitiveness report. So we are using that data and checking if that data kills our coefficient, and it doesn't kill the coefficient at all. And you do not get much out of those competitiveness indicators. Actually, you get the wrong sign in one of them. Okay, so we have very strong statistical support for all the predictions. I want to give you this graphical idea of what we have said, or what I have said, and what we have found. It's very simple. It's the only graphic that I would like you to take with you home, because it summarizes what we have been saying. The process of formal creation, the formal employment creation, is like a geological process. What I am showing there is cities of different sizes and different levels of complexity. And the blue bar, the light blue bar on top, is those that are not in the formal sector, okay? So you can consider them informal or idle or whatever, doesn't matter. What we want to show is the composition of the bars at the bottom. If you see the first, the lowest bars, the blue and the red and the green bars, are roughly about the same size in every city. So that first layer, that first geological layer, is basically the same everywhere, which means what we showed at the beginning. Every city has grocery stores, and has pump stations, and have, I don't know, construction sector and whatever. So those industries remain there, but on top of that, as cities grow, as cities develop, as become more complex, they add additional layers. So you see, for instance, in the case of Bogotá, the layers of the most complex industries are much bigger than those for Pasto. So that's the process. The process of creation of formal employment in cities, according with our model. I just want to spend a few minutes in an important extension of the model and of our empirical results, and then conclude with some policy implications. The extension that I want to discuss, because I think it's really essential, is the role of distance. Why I want to discuss this? Because the whole model is based on the idea that I mentioned from the beginning that cities are the actual places where labor markets operate. But in this result that I have shown you, there is nothing related to space. Space doesn't occur anywhere. There's no distances, there's no density, there's nothing. So obviously we have to check if what we are trying to convince you of it holds when we take into account distance. Since cities are the actual places where firms find the diversity of skills that they need, that necessarily means that longer commuting times may reduce the firm's catchment area of those skills, because obviously workers have a limitation of the time that they may spend every day traveling to their working places. So commuting times must have an influence. And therefore, the question that we have to ask is, what is the optimum commuting time that maximizes the ability of firms to mobilize skills? That's the question that we have to answer. And in order to answer that, we make the definition of city endogenous. Until now, we were using a definition of cities based on the algorithms developed by Duranton, which is based on commuting flows across industries, across cities. We will not use that anymore. Now what we want to do is to make the definition of city endogenous to the radius, to the time radius around the centroid of each municipality. Okay? So if you expand the radius, then you include more municipalities in the city. And to show that graphically, here you have a map. This is an actual map of Colombia. It doesn't only show the cities, but it's an actual map of Colombia. And you have here the cities. We are defining, the municipalities. We are including here all the municipalities that are at least 50,000, that have at least 50,000 population. And the intensity of the links between the cities is the time that you spend at commuting hour to go from the centroid of each municipality to the other. So for instance, those industries that are like a bunch on the mid-left, that are very intense, those are the coffee growing area cities, which are relatively well connected, and therefore at a relatively short distance, at a relatively short time, they may be considered a single city. Unlike Bogota, which is interesting. Bogota physically may be relatively close to municipalities nearby, but in terms of times is not close to all the municipalities. You see that the links are less intense. So with this, you can compute different artificial cities, if you want, as you expand the radius around the centroid of each municipality. And what the panel on the right shows is that if you have 0 minutes, then you have around 100 municipalities that are larger than 50,000. But as you expand the radius, for instance, if you expand the radius to about, let's say, 50 minutes, you must have like 50 cities. All right? And so on and so forth. Now, we use that to run the whole model again and again and again with each set of cities. We do bootstrapping and run it again and again, and what we want to see is at what point you get the strongest, the highest coefficients and the strongest R squares, because that's where the radius is, the effect is the maximum. So what we find is that firms maximize their ability to mobilize skills when the time commuting radius is between 45 and 75 minutes. That's the time radius within those two vertical bars that are there. You see at that level, the coefficient reaches a sort of plateau, and the coefficients are significant. Once you move, especially to the right or also to the left, then they are smaller and become insignificant. So we have clearly evidence that distance does matter. And obviously, the cities that gain the most when they get connected to other cities are the smallest ones, the smaller ones. Because the big ones are already complex by themselves, the smaller ones become complex by becoming attached or part of a larger city. So let me conclude, and sorry that I took more than my allotted time, but Santiago was very relaxed and didn't interrupt me, which I appreciate. So let me wrap up with just a few words on the policy implications of what we have studied. if you want a city to create more formal employment, or if you want cities in general to create more formal employment, you know what? Talk more to its mayor and less to the Minister of Finance. Start by that. Because we usually think in terms of national policies, and then we go and talk to the Minister of Finance that it should increase taxes or reduce taxes or subsidies or whatever. No. Most of the variables, according with this, that really matter for formal employment creation are local variables and are handles, in many cases, that mayors have. And think of the generation of formal employment as an evolutionary process of accumulation, diversification, recombination of productive knowledge. That's what generates formal employment. To do things that are valuable to others that no one else can do, I mean, to do things that no other cities are doing, and therefore you face a big market. That's the things that you want to do. And ask yourself how to accelerate the process. That's what you want to do when you want to think in policy terms based on the approach that we have developed. And basically what our model says is, I mean, this comes almost naturally from the model, is that there are at least 4 building blocks to a formal employment strategy. First is there's a need for a strategy of intelligent diversification. Cities don't grow by specializing. Cities grow and generate more formal employment by diversifying, not diversifying in any way, in whatever way. No. There has to be a pattern to it. And basically, what policy makers have to do with the help of people like Ricardo and the atlases that we have developed and all that is identify those industries that have potential and identify the obstacles that may be impeding the development of those industries. So that's the first component. The second component is training focused on those industries because in many cases what may happen is that you don't have the skills, you don't have the knowledge, and then you have to work jointly with firms, because we're talking about tacit knowledge, to develop the skills that are needed in those potential industries. The third component of a policy, city-level policy to develop, to have formal employment, is infrastructure. Infrastructure, from our point of view, should be aimed basically at minimizing commuting times, not so much at reducing transportation costs, which is usually the emphasis. It may be important, we are not saying that. But what our model says is commuting times are very important. And then you have to coordinate with other municipalities. Each municipality working on its own is not going to get very far. So you have several areas in which you have to coordinate, training, zone planning, transport infrastructure, industrial relocation, and so on and so forth. So in a nutshell, what we are saying is that good urban policies are good active labor policies. Okay, that's the policy message of what we are saying. Okay, so that's what I wanted to tell you, and I finish with a question for you.
Thank you, Eduardo. That was a very enjoyable. The purpose of these presidential lectures is to give us food for thought. You've given us a big plate and a lot of material for thought, so we're very thankful. The downside is because we extended a little bit in time, we're not going to be able to have a Q&A with Eduardo. But we can certainly email, send comments and tackle him in the hallway out here. Before I close, just 2 quick things, and then we can all go for lunch. First, as Eduardo was speaking, Professor Darrell McLeod joined the conference, and we just want to thank you as much as we have thanked Professor Fishlow and Nora. He was the first treasurer of LACEA, and a lot of his work was together with Nora and Al putting this together. So, Professor, we take advantage of being here. Thank you. And last, I take advantage of the fact that Federico and Jerry and Mariano are here, which our hosts have done a wonderful thing, a wonderful job, and we're always very pleased to be in Buenos Aires, but particularly this event that has been put together. So please also thank me in thanking Mariano and Federico.